My family used me as an ATM for 3 years. I paid $100,000 for my brother's college, car, and emergencies. But when I discovered the total at 2 a.m., I moved out silently and left them broke without my money. I'm 27 years old. I work in corporate accounting. And for 3 years, I basically supported my entire family without realizing they were using me. Until one day at 2 a.m., I did the math and almost threw up when I saw the total figure. I guess I should start at the beginning, when I made the dumbest decision of my adult life, which was moving back into my parents' house after living on my own for like 5 years. The thing is, at the time it seemed like a smart financial decision, you know? I had been paying $1,400 a month for a decent apartment in the city, and my parents offered to let me live with them for $800 a month while I saved up for a down payment on a house. My dad had gotten his hours reduced at his sales job. My mom taught at a high school and made decent money, but nothing spectacular. And my brother Jordan was about to start college. I thought, well, I'll help them out a bit with rent, save money. It's a win-win, right? How naive I was, seriously. The first few months were pretty normal. I mean, yeah, there were those typical things about living with your parents again when you're already an adult, like them asking where you're going every time you leave, or your mom knocking on the door to ask if you've eaten dinner yet, but nothing terrible. I paid my $800 on time the first day of every month, bought my own food most of the time, and basically tried to stay out of everyone's way. My sister Lauren, who's 25 and was doing her PhD in another city, would call me often and tell me to be careful, that she knew mom and dad and knew how they could be manipulative when it suited them, but I thought she was exaggerating because they had never been like that with me before. Then August came, and Jordan was about to start his first year of college. One night we were all having dinner together, something my parents insisted on doing like 3 times a week, which was kind of annoying, but whatever. And mom dropped the bomb very casually. She said something like, "Thomas, your father and I have been looking at the numbers, and with your dad's reduced hours, we're not going to be able to cover all of Jordan's tuition, and we know you're making good money at your job. So we thought maybe you could help us with part of it this semester, just until your dad gets something better." And I just sat there with my fork in my hand thinking, how do I say no to this without seeming like the selfish asshole older brother? The amount they were asking for was like $4,000 for the semester, which wasn't small money, but it wasn't impossible for me at that point either. I had good savings because I had been very careful with my money since I started working, and honestly I did feel bad for Jordan because it wasn't his fault that my parents' financial situation was complicated. So I said yes, that I could help with that amount. And the relief on my mom's face was so genuine that I felt good about having done it, you know? Like I was being the responsible and supportive older brother. But here's where things started getting weird in a way I didn't notice until much later. That first $4,000 payment turned into another $4,000 payment for the next semester. And then mom mentioned that Jordan needed textbooks that cost like $800. And could I help with that too? And then it turned out he needed a new laptop because the one he had was too old and slow for his classes, so there went another $1,200. And all this in addition to my $800 monthly rent, obviously. By Jordan's second year of college, I was basically paying his entire tuition, not just a part. The conversation had evolved from, "Could you help us with a portion?" to, "We need you to cover the full semester," without me really noticing when that shift had happened. And the worst part is, I kept thinking it was temporary, that at any moment my dad would get better hours or a better job, and I could stop being the family ATM. What really gets me when I think about it now is how Jordan started to change during that time. At first, he was super grateful. Like he'd send me messages saying, "Thanks, bro. This means a lot to me. I'm going to pay you back someday." But gradually, and when I say gradually, I mean over the course of like a year and a half, that gratitude transformed into expectation and then into something close to demand. By his third year, Jordan would literally text me like, "Hey, I need $500 for books this Friday. Make sure you transfer it to me," without a please or anything, as if it was my automatic obligation. And my parents, God, my parents became masters of emotional manipulation. Every time I showed the slightest resistance to paying for something, out came the same old speech. Mom would say things like, "We thought you valued education, Thomas, or your brother is trying to build a future and you want to sabotage it over money." Dad was more subtle but equally effective. He'd make comments like, "Your sister, Lauren, never needed our help because she's so smart, but Jordan is different and needs our support, and you're the only one who can give it to him right now." As if I was responsible for the academic differences between my siblings or something. Lauren would call me every 2 weeks or so and ask me how things were going, and I always told her everything was fine because I didn't want to admit that maybe she had been right from the beginning. But she knows me too well. I mean, we're very close even though we live in different cities. And one day she asked me directly, "Thomas, how much money have you given them in total?" And I had no idea. I literally hadn't kept track because it was easier not to think about it. Then came the car moment. Jordan turned 21, and my parents decided he needed a car to get to and from college. He lived at home. The college was like 40 minutes away. A reasonable used car would have cost maybe $8,000 or $10,000, but no, they found one for $19,000 that according to them was perfect and safe and reliable, and I asked if I could help with the down payment, because they would make the monthly payments. The down payment was $7,000. $7,000. And I, like the idiot I was, said yes because by that point I was so conditioned to say yes that my brain didn't even process the option of saying no. But guess what happened with those monthly payments my parents were going to make? Exactly. After like 3 months, they started asking me to cover those too because things were tight and it was just temporary until their situation improved. And just like that, suddenly, I was paying for a $19,000 car for my brother, who wasn't even thanking me anymore at that point. In fact, when they handed him the car, Jordan looked at it, and his first reaction was, "Couldn't they get the newer model?" I swear I almost hit him right there. During all this time, I kept working, obviously, and I had gotten like 2 promotions and salary increases, which was great except that every time my parents found out I was earning more, somehow new expenses appeared that they needed my help with. Like if the heating was too expensive that winter, or if they needed to repair the roof, or if Jordan needed new clothes for his professional internships. And I paid, and paid, and paid, because at some point my entire identity had become being the family provider, and I didn't know how to get out of that role without feeling like a horrible person. The straw that broke the camel's back, or rather the thing that finally made me see the complete reality, happened one November night at 2 a.m. when I couldn't sleep. I was lying in bed thinking about how I had been living there for almost 3 years and my savings hadn't grown at all. In fact, they had decreased. And I decided to do something I had been avoiding doing because I knew I wasn't going to like the result. I pulled out my laptop and opened an Excel spreadsheet and started going through all my bank statements from the last 3 years. It was like 4 hours of pure hell as I added up every transfer, every payment, every small favor I had done. Jordan's tuition for 6 semesters, the books, the laptop, the iPad that it also turned out he needed, the car and the monthly car payments, the car insurance, because obviously that also fell on me, the rent I had been paying religiously, the family emergencies that appeared every 2 months, the house repairs, the birthday and Christmas gifts for the whole family that somehow I always ended up paying for because I was the one with money. When I got to the final number, I had to get up and go to the bathroom because I felt like I was going to throw up. $100,000. I had spent approximately $100,000 damn dollars in 3 years. That's like $33,000 a year, almost $3,000 a month on top of what I spent on myself. And it's not like I was making little money. I mean, I had a good job in corporate accounting and was making good money for my age, but I wasn't a millionaire either. That $100,000 would have been the perfect down payment for a house, or I could have invested it, or literally done anything else with that money, other than give it to my family who apparently saw me as a human ATM. I stayed awake the rest of the night, literally feeling every possible emotion. Anger, because they had used me. Sadness, because my own family had seen me as a source of money rather than as a person. Guilt, because maybe I had allowed this to happen by not setting boundaries from the beginning. And what bothered me most was that I knew if I confronted my parents about this, they were going to turn the situation around and make me feel like the bad guy. I did something I never thought I'd do, which was post my story on Reddit in one of those family relationship subreddits. I didn't put real names or anything, but I told everything. The numbers, the manipulations, everything. And the response was overwhelming. Hundreds of comments from people telling me this was financial abuse, that my parents were manipulative, that Jordan was completely spoiled, that I needed to get out of that situation immediately. Some people shared similar stories and how they had managed to break free, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I wasn't crazy, that my feelings of being used were completely valid. Lauren called me that day. You think she has some kind of sister radar because she always knows when something is wrong, and I finally told her everything. I expected her to say, "I told you so," but instead, she just listened to everything without interrupting, and at the end said, "Thomas, you have to get out of there. This isn't going to get better on its own. They're never going to stop asking you for money because you've taught them that you'll always say yes." And she was right. Honestly, she was completely right. 2 days later, Jordan texted me, asking if I could give him $400 for new winter tires for his car, the car I had bought him, and something in me just broke. For the first time in 3 years, I wrote a word I had never used before with my family regarding money. No. Just that. No. Jordan responded with, "What do you mean no?" And I wrote, "I mean no, get a part-time job if you need tires." And then I turned off my phone because I knew what was coming next. What came next was my mom knocking on my door like 20 minutes later, with that worried voice she used when she wanted to manipulate me, saying, "Thomas, honey, your brother told me you said no about the tires. Is everything okay? Did something happen at work?" And I opened the door and said, "No, Mom. What's happening is I'm not going to keep paying for everything anymore. Jordan is 22 years old and can get a part-time job like any other college student." Her face went from concern to shock to anger in like 3 seconds, and she started with the usual speech about how family supports each other and how I was being selfish. But this time, I just closed the door while she was still talking. That night, I started looking for apartments in cities, in other states. Not in the city where I was, but far away, like 4 states away. I found a perfect place in a city where my company had another office and where I had been considering a transfer for months. I filled out the application that same night, talked to my boss the next day about the transfer, and a week later, I had a signed lease contract for an apartment that no one in my family knew existed. The plan was simple: announce my departure with as little advance notice as possible to minimize psychological warfare, pack quickly, and get out. I called Lauren and told her my plan, and she literally screamed with happiness on the phone and offered to come help me move when the time came. I told her it wasn't necessary, but she insisted because, and I quote, "I don't trust that Mom and Dad won't try to sabotage you somehow." I waited until 2 weeks before my move date to tell them. It was at one of those forced family dinners. We were all sitting eating roast chicken that my mom had made, and that she had probably bought with money I had given her for emergencies, and I just dropped the bomb. I said, "By the way, I'm moving in 2 weeks. I got a job transfer to another city, and I already signed the lease contract for an apartment there." Absolute silence. Like in the movies when everything freezes. My dad stopped chewing. My mom stared at me with her mouth open, and Jordan simply said, "What?" My mom was the first to recover, and that's when the show started. How could I do this without consulting them? What was going to happen with Jordan and his tuition? They were counting on me. This was going to ruin the family. It was incredibly selfish of me. After everything they had done for me, I was abandoning them like this. My dad joined in, saying they had sacrificed a lot to give me a good life, and I owed them at least stability and support now that they needed me. Jordan just kept repeating, "But I'm going to pay for my stuff," as if that was genuinely his only concern. I stayed calm, which was difficult because I wanted to scream, and I said, "Jordan is 22 years old and can get student loans or a job like millions of other students. You have 2 incomes and can adjust your budget, and I need to live my own life." My mom started crying. That type of manipulative crying she used when she wanted to make me feel guilty, and said how could I be so cruel, that she never thought she would raise such an ungrateful son. I got up from the table, told them my decision was made, and went to my room. The next 2 weeks were psychological hell. My parents alternated between giving me the silent treatment, trying to make me feel guilty with constant passive-aggressive comments, and having serious conversations where they tried to convince me to stay. Jordan avoided me completely except to send me messages telling me I was a bad brother. The house felt like a war zone, and I basically lived in my room packing my things and counting the days. My mom tried one last big manipulation like 3 days before my move. She came into my room really crying this time, you think, and told me how could I do this to her, that since my grandmother died years ago. Wait, I never mentioned that my maternal grandmother had died when I was like 20. But yeah, that happened, and it was hard for my mom. She had emotionally depended on having me close, and that I was abandoning her just like everyone she loves eventually abandons her. It was pure emotional manipulation of the lowest kind, and although part of me felt bad, the bigger part of me was already too angry and tired to let myself be affected. Lauren arrived on moving day after driving like 6 hours to help me. She brought a rented truck, and her boyfriend also came to help with the heavy stuff. My parents tried to make things difficult in very petty ways. Like my mom said that some of the things in my room were technically family property and I couldn't take them. Things that I had obviously bought with my own money. Lauren literally stood between my mom and my boxes and told her, "Either you get out of the way or we call the police to mediate, your choice." My mom moved but kept muttering things about ungrateful children and broken families. Jordan didn't even come out of his room to say goodbye. My dad gave me a super cold and formal handshake and said, "I hope this is what you really want," in a tone that suggested I was making the worst mistake of my life. And my mom just hugged me crying and saying, "When you realize your mistake, I don't know if we'll be able to forgive you." I just said, "Goodbye, Mom," and got in Lauren's car. The drive to my new apartment was weird. Lauren and her boyfriend were in the truck ahead, and I was alone in my car with all my stuff that fit in there. And as I drove, I realized I felt incredibly light, like I had removed a huge weight from my shoulders. Yes, I felt guilty. I'm not going to lie, because that's how long-term manipulation works. It leaves that residual guilt. But more than anything, I felt free. The first months in my new apartment were like learning to be a person again. I started paying for only my own things, saving money for real, having hobbies I had neglected, going out with new people. I didn't answer calls or messages from my parents or Jordan. I only kept in touch with Lauren, who updated me on what was happening with the family. And what was happening was predictable. They were struggling financially without my constant money. It turned out my parents had structured their entire lifestyle around my financial support without me realizing it. They hadn't saved anything, they hadn't made adjustments to their spending, they had assumed I would always be there to cover the gaps. Jordan had to get a part-time job at a coffee shop, which apparently was devastating for him because it cut into his video game time or whatever he did when he wasn't in class. Lauren told me that my parents tried to pressure Jordan to contribute financially to the house in the same way I had, and that's when Jordan started to understand what I had been living through. About 6 months after I moved, I received an email from Jordan. It was long, probably like 1,000 words, and it was basically an apology. He said he had never realized how much money I had been putting in because for him that's just how things were, that I was the rich brother who helped out, and that when my parents started pressuring him the same way, he finally understood how manipulative they could be. He apologized for being a spoiled, ungrateful brat, for taking everything I did for granted, and for not defending me when I announced I was leaving. He also told me he had taken out student loans for his last year and was working to pay them off himself. I didn't respond immediately because I needed to process whether the apology was genuine or was another manipulation attempt. But after I'm talking it over with Lauren, I decided it sounded sincere. The most surreal thing was receiving a physical letter in the mail from my parents like 8 months after moving. It was a handwritten letter from my mom. My dad had signed at the end, and it was weird. Basically, they admitted they had taken advantage of me, that they had exploited my generous nature, and that they had realized they had lost me as a son because of their greed and manipulation. They said they didn't expect me to forgive them, but wanted me to know they understood what they had done wrong. Part of me thought this was another tactic to make me feel bad and come back being their bank, but Lauren assured me my parents were genuinely struggling and had had to make big changes in their lives. I didn't respond to them for a month, but finally, I decided to send them something. Not a long letter or anything emotional, but a check for $5,000 with a note that said, "This is to help you adjust. It's a gift. Not a loan. You don't have to pay me back. But it's the last thing you're going to receive from me." If you want to have a relationship with me in the future, it has to be based on mutual respect, not money. After sending it, I felt weird, like maybe I was being weak. But Lauren told me I was setting a clear boundary while still showing I didn't hate them, which was okay. It's been like 2 years since I moved, and things are better but different. They never ask me for money because I think they know that if they do, I'll cut contact completely. Jordan finished college with loans he's paying off, got a decent job, moved to his own apartment, and really seems to be trying to be a better person. We talk more frequently now, although there's still that underlying awkwardness of everything that happened. Lauren is still my favorite person in the family, obviously. She never judged me either for giving so much money originally, or for, finally, saying, enough. She comes to visit me 2 or 3 times a year, and I go see her too. She's literally the only family relationship that feels completely normal and healthy. As for me, I'm good, better than good actually. I got another promotion last year. I'm dating someone who's amazing and who, when I told her this whole story, was shocked, but was super supportive, and I'm finally saving real money to buy my own house. My savings recovered pretty quickly once I stopped being the family bank. Turns out when you only pay for your own stuff, you can save a decent amount of money. Who would have thought? Sometimes I still feel that residual guilt, especially when I talk to my parents and I can hear in their voices that they're having a hard time financially. But then I remember that Excel spreadsheet with the $100,000 in family expenses over 3 years, and the guilt goes away pretty quickly. I did more than enough. I gave more than any son should have to give, and the fact that they built their life around my money isn't my responsibility to fix. Last week, Jordan called me just to tell me about his new job and ask how I was doing, with no hidden request or anything, and it was genuinely nice. I still don't know if we'll ever have the sibling relationship we should have always had, but at least now when we talk, it's between 2 independent adults, not between an ATM and its user. And that, I guess, is progress.